The Becker 754. This is the much wanted security bypass to bypass the security option. If you have a radio, you're doing this at your own risk. If the radio is functional, I would not suggest playing around with it unless you have one that's needing a reload and you want to just learn more about this connector or just simply bypass it. Pin number 1 is ground, it is a brown wire. Pin number 2 is not used. Pin 3 is your vehicle speed sensor. It increases the volume with vehicle speed. And pin number 4 is a jump from pin 1 to 4. That is a ground. And it is providing information for the internal inverter logic board. And pin number 5 is the wire of interest. This is the wire that must be kept low. Has this little tab and this connector that's plugged right into the very back of the radio. If you slide the radio out of the dash, this little tab right here gets this connector unplugged, and that trips the alarm system, and it also erases the contents in the little RAM chip in the radio itself, causing a need for a reload with the reset tool. The reset tool actually loads a little bit of code in a RAM chip that is aboard the radio that's kept alive through a battery. There is the two ways you can bypass is internally. Another way I found, this is a Mercedes harness that doesn't have a tab. It is kind of a just put in place on the radio. This just plugs into ground on the chassis of the radio, and this plugs into the security connector, and it only uses the pin 5, which all we're doing is keeping this pin 5 at a logic low, keeping it grounded. I don't know if this harness is still available or not, but anyhow, it could be easily made. They're just taking pin 5. Here's the part number. It looks like a 201540134, and that again is a Mercedes harness, and all it's doing is taking pin 5 and keeping it at ground. Taking a look at a radio that has not had anything done to it inside, the back of the security little connector inverter board here is taking that logic low from the connector, from the security connector, and it ends up keeping this line high as long as you are keeping that plugged in. If this red wire here becomes a low, it will trip the microprocessor and cause it to erase the contents or alter the contents of the RAM. So you're simply clipping this red wire away, and right here where it attaches to the board, you're removing this red wire off the connector. The other ground and the vehicle speed sensor here, it's not necessary to remove those. You could leave those because they're not part of the actual security. The ground and the vehicle speed sensor. This right here, the red wire here that's going to this tab right here, this is the one that we're interested in, the one that's on the tab. Taking a look at a radio that has had the security bypass, they did remove all of the wiring. They removed the vehicle, the little supply line here, and the vehicle speed sensor, and the red wire for the security connector here, and they just clipped them away from, unsoldered it from the board, so nothing is attached at the three little points. So that's one way of removing it. This radio has had a permanent bypass on it, which if anything is plugged into the security connector on the back, nothing will happen. The radio will not trip. Taking a look on the schematic, this highlighted in green line here, They're calling it the up line. If this line is ever pulled low, it will trip the security. It's pin 25 of the microprocessor, has an internal pull-up resistor, and that is keeping this line high. If this line ever becomes low, it will trip the security feature. And the low is changed by this little inverter board. This little inverter board has a low input, but is keeping this at a high level. And pulling the low from the back of the security connector, bringing it high, makes this low. So it's an inverter, the little inverter circuit right here. So it's just inverting the logic. And this logic here, if it gets ever pulled low on this line, it takes the input on pin 25, pulls it low, and the software alters the ROM code.